The norther came howling down from the Llano Estacado that December evening, carrying ice and regret in equal measure. Thomas Mallory pulled his collar higher against the wind as his horse picked its way along the familiar trail. Though 5 years had passed since he'd last ridden this path. 5 years since he'd buried Elizabeth beneath the cottonwood tree. 5 years of running from a grief that followed him like his own shadow. The rocking M Ranch sprawled before him in the gathering dusk, its buildings dark shapes against the pewter sky. No lights in the main house, or wait. There was one. A soft glow from what used to be the nursery window. His chest tightened. Sarah would be 5 now. Would she even remember him? A father who'd left when she was barely walking, too broken by loss to face the child who had her mother's eyes. He'd sent money, of course, regular as clockwork through the bank in Amarillo, made sure Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, had everything needed to run the place and raise the girl proper. But money wasn't the same as being there. Money didn't tuck a child into bed or chase away nightmares or teach her to ride. Thomas dismounted near the barn, his boots crunching on frost-brittle grass. The place looked well kept. He'd give Mrs. Henderson that. Fences mended, barn doors hung straight, no broken windows. But there was something else, something different he couldn't quite name. The vegetable garden had been expanded. For one thing. And was that a chicken coop where the old tool shed used to be? He led his horse into the barn, moving quiet as a ghost. No sense announcing himself just yet. He needed to gather his courage first, find the right words to say to a daughter who might not even know his face. The barn was warm, sweet with the smell of good hay. The horses in their stalls nickered soft greetings, some he recognized, some new. Everything spoke of careful tending. After seeing to his mount, Thomas walked toward the house, his spurs making soft chiming sounds with each step. The kitchen door stood slightly ajar, letting out a wedge of yellow lamplight and something else, the sound of singing. He froze, one hand on the porch rail. It wasn't Elizabeth's voice, though Lord knew he'd heard it often enough in dreams. This voice was different, younger, with a slight Missouri drawl that softened the edges of the words. The melody was an old one, something about a mockingbird and a looking-glass, but the singer had changed it somehow, made it gentler. Thomas crept closer, peering through the gap in the door. The kitchen was transformed from his memory herbs hanging from the rafters, bright cloth on the table. Everything speaking of a woman's touch, but not Elizabeth's formal elegance. This was something earthier, more practical. Then he saw them. A young woman sat in the rocking chair by the stove. Sarah curled in her lap like a contented cat. The child's eyes were heavy with approaching sleep, one small hand clutching the woman's apron. The woman herself couldn't have been more than 25, with wheat-colored hair pinned up simple and a face that might have been plain except for the extraordinary tenderness in it as she looked down at the child. And if that looking-glass gets broke," she sang soft, "Mama's gonna buy you a billy goat." Mama? The word hit Thomas like a physical blow. Sarah snuggled deeper into the woman's embrace, and something twisted in his chest pain and something else he couldn't name. "Mary," Sarah mumbled, sleep thick. "Will you stay forever?" The singing stopped. The woman, Mary, smoothed Sarah's dark hair with one work-roughened hand. "Hush now, little bird. No talk of forever. Just close your eyes and dream of spring." But Mrs. Henderson said, "Never you mind what anyone says. You're safe and warm and loved, and that's what matters tonight." Thomas must have made some sound, because Mary's head came up sharp, like a deer scenting danger. Their eyes met across the lamp-lit kitchen, hers wide and startled. Some color he couldn't name in the dim light. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she rose carefully, shifting Sarah in her arms with practiced ease. The child murmured protest but didn't wake. Mary studied him, taking in the travel dust, the expensive coat, the way he stood there like he didn't know if he had the right to enter his own home. "Mr. Mallory," she said, and it wasn't a question. He nodded, not trusting his voice. "Mrs. Henderson said you might come back someday." Her voice stayed low, mindful of the sleeping child. "She's at her sister's in town. The old woman took poorly last week. I've been managing things." "You're the help." The words came out rougher than intended. Something flickered in her eyes, pride, maybe, or hurt. "I'm Mary Whitfield. I mind the house and look after Sarah." She shifted the child's weight. "I should put her to bed." Thomas swallowed hard. "May I?" Mary studied him for another long moment, then stepped aside. "She's heavier than she looks. Mind her head." Thomas reached out with hands that shook only a little. The weight of his daughter settled into his arms, solid and real and alive. Sarah stirred, eyes fluttering open for just a moment, Elizabeth's eyes, gray as winter rain. "Papa." The word was more question than recognition. "Yeah, baby girl, Papa's home." She blinked at him, solemn as a judge. Then her eyes drifted shut again. "Mary sings prettier," she mumbled, and fell back asleep. Behind him, Thomas heard Mary make a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. When he turned, she was already moving toward the stairs. "Her room's this way. Try not to wake her fully. She's the devil's own time getting back to sleep if she comes full awake." Thomas followed, noting the changes as they went. New curtains, pictures on the walls, childish drawings mixed with what looked like pressed flowers in frames. The house felt lived in a way it never had even when Elizabeth was alive. Elizabeth had preferred things formal, proper. This was something else entirely. Sarah's room near took his breath away. Someone had painted a garden on the walls, wildflowers and butterflies, and a whole story told in careful brushstrokes. A rag doll sat on the dresser next to a collection of interesting rocks. Books, so many books for a child so young, lined a low shelf. "She loves stories," Mary said soft, pulling back the quilts. "Can't get enough of them." Thomas laid Sarah down gentle as he could manage. She curled immediate into her pillow, one hand reaching out. Mary tucked the doll into her arms without being asked, smoothing the covers with automatic care. They stood there a moment, watching her sleep. Thomas became aware of Mary beside him, the faint scent of lye soap and lavender. The way she stood protective near the bed like she'd fight the world to keep this child safe. "The song," he said finally. "What was it?" Mary glanced at him, then away. "Just something she likes. She hums it sometimes, so I made up words to go along." "She called you Mama." The words hung between them like a challenge. Mary's chin came up. "She was barely walking when you left. Mr. Mallory. She needed someone." The accusation in it was clear as spring water. Thomas felt anger rise, defensive and hot, but it died quick as it came. She was right. He'd run like a coward. Left his baby girl to be raised by strangers because he couldn't bear to look at her without seeing Elizabeth dying all over again. "How long have you been here?" 3 years come spring. Mrs. Henderson hired me when her rheumatism got too bad to chase after a toddler." Mary moved to the door. "There's stew keeping warm if you're hungry. Coffee too." "I should be getting to town. Find a room." "Don't be foolish." The words were sharp. "This is your house. I'll make up your room. It's been closed up, but it won't take long to air." "Where do you sleep?" Color rose in her cheeks. "The room off the kitchen. It's proper enough, Mrs. Henderson arranged it all right and proper before she hired me. Nobody could say different." Thomas hadn't even been thinking impropriety, but now he was aware of it. A young woman. A widow, he assumed from her plain dress and lack of rings save a thin gold band. Alone in his house with his child. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant and what you didn't." Mary's voice stayed level. "I'll see to your room." She swept past him. "All business now." Thomas lingered, looking down at Sarah sleeping peaceful in her painted garden room. She had Elizabeth's face, but something else too, a sturdiness that was all her own. Or maybe that came from Mary's influence, the woman who'd made this empty house into something that felt like home. When he finally made his way back to the kitchen, Mary had indeed aired his room and laid out fresh water for washing. The stew was beef and winter vegetables. Simple but good. Better than anything he'd eaten in months of boarding house meals. She poured coffee without asking, then stood by the stove like she didn't know whether to sit or go. "Please," Thomas said. "Sit. Tell me about things. The ranch. Sarah. How you came to be here." Mary sat careful on the edge of a chair, back straight as a fence post. Up close, he could see she was older than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, with fine lines around her eyes that spoke of sun and sorrow. Her hands on the coffee cup were work rough but gentle, the hands of someone who knew about tending things. "Not much to tell," she said. "I came west from Missouri after my husband died. Heard Mrs. Henderson was looking for help. She taught me what I needed to know about running a house this size, and I already knew children from raising my sisters. I'm sorry about your husband." Her mouth tightened. It was a long time ago. Not so long, Thomas thought, noting how she still wore the wedding band. But then, he still wore his too. Some griefs you carried forever. Like a stone in your shoe you'd gotten so used to you'd forgotten how to walk without it. "Sarah seems happy," he ventured. For the first time, Mary smiled true and warm. "She's a blessing, smart as a whip and twice as quick. She'll run you ragged if you let her, but she's got a good heart, kind to animals and smaller children. She's been helping me with the chickens, says she wants to learn everything about running a ranch so she can do it herself someday." Chickens. I started keeping them for eggs and meat. Made sense, with the mercantile so far. We've got a good garden, too. Put up enough vegetables to see us through winter. Sarah helped with the canning, stood on a stool, and stirred the pots, careful as you please. Thomas tried to picture it, his daughter helping with woman's work, learning practical things. Elizabeth would have been horrified. She'd wanted Sarah raised as a lady, with proper schooling and manners, but listening to Mary talk about Sarah collecting eggs and putting up preserves, he wondered if maybe this way wasn't better. "Thank you," he said sudden, "for taking care of her, for making this place." He gestured helpless at the warm kitchen, the evidence of life being lived. Mary looked at him steady. "I didn't do it for you, Mr. Mallory. I did it for her. That child deserved better than growing up in a house full of ghosts and paid help. She deserved someone who'd sing to her at night and teach her to tie her shoes and tell her stories about mockingbirds and looking glasses." The words stung because they were true. Thomas looked into his coffee, seeing nothing but his own failures reflected back. "I know, I couldn't, after Elizabeth. I know about loss. Mr. Mallory," Mary's voice had gentled some, "I know about waking up and forgetting for just a moment that they're gone, and then remembering hits you all over again. But that little girl upstairs didn't ask to be born into sorrow. She needed you, and you weren't here. So she found you instead. We found each other." Mary stood, began clearing the dishes. "Now you're back. Question is, for how long?" Thomas watched her move around the kitchen. Everything in its place, and a place for everything. "I don't know. I thought I was ready, but seeing her, she looked so much like her mother." "No." Mary turned, and her voice was fierce. "She looks like herself. She's got her mother's eyes, maybe, but that stubborn chin is all her own. And the way she laughs, that's not anybody but Sarah. You'll see, if you stay around long enough to know her." The challenge in it was clear. Thomas felt something shift in his chest, some wall he'd built starting to crack. This woman, this stranger, knew his daughter better than he did, had been more of a parent to her than he'd ever been. The shame of it burned. But underneath was something else, gratitude. Maybe that Sarah had found someone to love her when he couldn't. "I want to try," he said, the words coming hard. "I want to know her. I just don't know how." Mary studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "She wakes with the roosters, likes porridge with honey and milk fresh from the cow. After breakfast, she does her letters. She's learning to read and write. Then she helps with chores until dinner. Afternoons, if weather permits. She likes to ride her pony? Yes, she has a pony. A little paint mare, gentle as a lamb. Evenings are for stories and sometimes singing. She says her prayers before bed, though sometimes she adds things that would make a preacher blush. Like what? A smile tugged at Mary's mouth. Last week, she asked God to make the rooster stop being so mean to the hens, and could he please send her a baby brother, but only if he didn't cry too much. Despite everything, Thomas found himself almost smiling back. "And you, what's your day like?" "Much the same, with cooking and washing and mending thrown in. It's a good life, Mr. Mallory. Quiet, maybe, but good." They stood there in the lamplit kitchen, two strangers bound by the child sleeping upstairs. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows. But inside was warm and safe, smelling of coffee and bread and home. "I'll try not to disrupt things too much," Thomas said finally. "I know she's used to her routines." "She's used to people leaving," Mary corrected. "Her mother, her father, Mrs. Henderson coming and going. Maybe instead of worrying about disrupting things, you could try staying still for a while." The words hung between them like a dare. Thomas nodded slow. "Maybe I could." Mary banked the stove for the night, moving with the unconscious grace of long practice. "Breakfast is at 6. If you're not up, we won't wait." It was a dismissal and a test both. Thomas recognized it, accepted it. "I'll be up." She paused at the door to her room. Looking back, in the low light, her plain face held shadows and secrets. "Mr. Mallory, that song, 'Hush, Little Baby,' your wife used to sing it. Sarah remembered the tune, but not the words. That's why I made up new ones." Then she was gone, leaving Thomas alone with the cooling stove and the weight of all the years between who he'd been and who he'd need to become. Thomas woke before dawn, old habits stirring him from uneasy sleep. For a moment he forgot where he was, the bed too soft, the room too quiet. Then memory rushed back. Home. He was home, with a daughter who barely knew him and a woman who'd taken his place in all but name. He dressed in the dark, pulling on work clothes instead of the fine suit he'd worn for traveling. If he was going to stay, might as well look the part. The house was still as he made his way to the kitchen, but a lamp already burned low on the table. Mary was up before him. Of course. He found her at the stove, her movements economical in the pre-dawn gloom. She'd changed from yesterday's brown dress to a blue one, just as plain but somehow softer. Her hair was already pinned neat, though a few wisps escaped to curl at her neck. "Coffee's ready," she said without turning. "Porridge will be done soon." Thomas poured himself a cup, noting she'd set out 2 mugs. Expected him. Then, "Can I help?" That made her turn, eyebrows raised. "You know your way around a kitchen." "Mr. Mallory. Army taught me enough to get by, and it's Thomas, Mr. Mallory was my father." She studied him a moment, then nodded at the woodbox. "Stove could use feeding." They worked in companionable silence, Thomas splitting kindling while Mary stirred the porridge and sliced bread. It was peaceful, this early morning quiet, broken only by the pop of wood in the stove and the distant crow of the rooster Mary's God hadn't reformed yet. "She'll be down soon," Mary said, setting out a third bowl, smaller than the others. "Fair warning, she's not much for conversation until she's had her breakfast. Takes after her mother that way." The words slipped out before Thomas could stop them. He waited for the familiar stab of pain, but it came duller than expected. Mary made a noncommittal sound, pouring milk into a pitcher. Most folks aren't at their best first thing. Sarah just happens to be honest about it. As if summoned, they heard footsteps on the stairs, quick and light, accompanied by what sounded like a one-sided conversation. Sarah appeared in the doorway, hair a dark tangle and her nightgown twisted sideways. She dragged the rag doll by one arm, and her face held the puffy displeasure of a child woken too early by necessity. She went straight to Mary, climbing into her lap without preamble. Mary shifted to accommodate her, one arm coming around the child, automatic as breathing. Sarah buried her face in Mary's shoulder, mumbling something that might have been mourning or might have been a complaint against mornings in general. "Good morning to you too, little bird," Mary said, smoothing the tangled hair. "We have company for breakfast, remember?" Sarah's head came up slowly, like she was remembering through the fog of sleep. Her eyes, Elizabeth's eyes, found Thomas across the table. They regarded each other, father and daughter, strangers despite shared blood. "You're still here," she said finally. "I'm still here." She seemed to consider this, then turned back to Mary. "Can I have honey?" "After you eat some plain first. You know the rules." Sarah sighed dramatically but slid off Mary's lap and into her own chair. She studied Thomas while she ate, solemn as a judge at trial. He tried not to fidget under that steady gaze. "Mary says you have a ranch up north," she said finally. "Had," Thomas corrected. "Sold it. This is my ranch now. Our ranch." "Mine and Mary's." The innocent question hit like a slap. Mary's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "Yours and mine," Thomas said, careful. "I'm your father." "I know that." Sarah's tone suggested he was being deliberately obtuse. "But Mary lives here, so it's hers too." Thomas looked at Mary, who was very busy not looking at either of them. "I suppose, in a way, yes." This seemed to satisfy Sarah. She returned to her porridge, apparently done with complicated questions of property and belonging. Mary set a plate of bread and butter in front of Thomas with perhaps more force than necessary. "Sarah," Mary said, "why don't you tell your father about your pony?" The transformation was instant. Sarah's whole face lit up. Sleep forgotten. "Her name is Buttercup, and she's the smartest horse in Texas. She can count to 3 with her hoof, and she knows when it's Sunday because she won't take the bit proper. Mary says that's coincidence, but I know better." "You named your horse Buttercup?" Thomas asked, fighting a smile. Sarah's chin jutted out. "It's a good name. She likes flowers." "Eats them, more like," Mary murmured. "Destroyed my nasturtiums last summer. But you said they were pretty in her mane afterward," Sarah pointed out with 5-year-old logic. Mary's mouth twitched. "That I did." Thomas watched them, this easy back and forth born of 3 years of mornings just like this. They had their own language, their own jokes, their own way of being. He was the outsider here, ranch deed or no. After breakfast, Sarah disappeared to dress all by myself, she announced proudly while Mary began clearing dishes. Thomas picked up a cloth to dry, ignoring her surprised look. "Tell me about her," he said. "Not the daily things. Tell me who she is." Mary's hands stilled in the wash water. "She's brave," she said finally. "Scared of thunderstorms, but won't admit it. She'd rather climb a tree than play with dolls. But she loves that rag baby fierce. She's got a tender heart, cried for an hour when we had to put down a sick chicken. But practical, too. Asked if we could eat it since it was dead anyway." Thomas almost choked on a laugh. "Did you—" "Maid soup. She said a prayer for its chicken soul first, though—" Mary resumed washing, her voice warming with memory. "She wants to know everything, why the sky's blue, where the wind comes from, how babies get in bellies. That last one gave Mrs. Henderson palpitations." "What did you tell her?" "Same way calves get in cows. She'd seen enough breeding on a ranch to work out the basics." Mary shot him a look. "Don't worry. I kept it appropriate, but I won't lie to her. Children deserve truth, even if it's simplified." Thomas dried a bowl, thinking. Elizabeth would have been horrified at such frank talk. She'd believed in preserving innocence, in proper subjects for proper times. But then, Elizabeth had grown up in Baltimore society. Out here, life and death were closer neighbors. "She sounds—" he searched for words. "More complete than I expected, more herself." Mary's hands had gone still again. When she spoke, her voice was soft. She was so small when you left, barely walking, still more baby than child. But even then, she was determined. Would pull herself up on furniture and fall 100 times. But keep trying. Used to watch the door something fierce. Those first months. The knife of guilt twisted deeper. Did she ask for me? At first, then less, then not at all. Mary pulled the stopper, water gurgling away. Children adapt. It's a blessing and a curse. Before Thomas could respond, Sarah burst back in, dressed in a green calico that had seen better days. Her hair was, well, she'd tried. I'm ready for lessons, she announced. Mary dried her hands. Let me fix that braid first. You look like you've been wrestling wildcats. I was wrestling my stockings. They wouldn't go on right. Sarah submitted to Mary's ministrations with the patience of long practice. Can Papa watch my letters? The casual use of Papa made Thomas's chest tight. If that's all right with Miss Mary. It's your house, Mary said neutral, working Sarah's hair into a neat plait. It's our house, Sarah corrected. You said so at breakfast. Mary's fingers fumbled slightly. She recovered quick, tying off the braid with a bit of ribbon. Lessons in the parlor. Get your slate. Thomas followed them to what had been Elizabeth's formal parlor. Like everything else, it had been transformed. Gone were the stiff horsehair chairs and delicate tables. Instead, a worn but comfortable sofa faced the fireplace, with rag rugs on the floor and children's drawings tacked to the walls. A low table held slates and chalk, books, and what looked like a collection of bird feathers. Sarah settled cross-legged on the floor, slate in lap, tongue already poking out in concentration. Mary sat in the rocking chair, and after a moment's hesitation, Thomas took the sofa. Let's see your letters from yesterday, Mary said. Sarah held up her slate, showing rows of careful but wobbly letters. I got confused on the R again. That's because you're rushing. Remember down, around, and out. Mary demonstrated in the air. Try again, slower this time. Thomas watched, fascinated despite himself. Mary was patient but not indulgent, making Sarah erase and retry when letters went crooked. She mixed instruction with encouragement, knowing just when Sarah was getting frustrated and needed a break. Tell your papa what letters you know, Mary suggested during one such break. Sarah brightened, reciting the alphabet with only 2 mistakes. And I can spell my name S-A-R-A-H. Mary taught me. She says soon I'll read whole books by myself. You're already reading some words, Mary reminded her. What does this say? She wrote cat on her own slate. Cat like Mr. Whiskers. Except he's not our cat. He just lives in the barn and eats mice. They worked for another half hour, Sarah's energy flagging as the sun climbed higher. Finally, Mary set aside the slates. That's enough for now. Chores next. Can Papa see Buttercup? Sarah asked, already bouncing up. If he wants. I want, Thomas said, earning a brilliant smile from his daughter. The henhouse came first, Sarah showing him how to collect eggs without getting pecked. You have to be firm, but gentle, she explained seriously, like Mary is with me. The casual observation made Mary color slightly. She busied herself scattering feed while Sarah chattered on about each hen's personality and laying habits. Thomas found himself genuinely interested, charmed by his daughter's earnest explanations. Buttercup proved to be a patient little paint mare, tolerating Sarah's enthusiastic grooming with the resignation of the well-loved. Sarah demonstrated the counting trick, which seemed to be more about treats than mathematics, while Mary leaned against the fence, watchful. She rides well, Thomas observed. Like she was born to it. Natural seat, good hands. She'll be breaking colts before she's 10 if she has her way. Mary's teaching me to rope, Sarah called from where she was picking Buttercup's hooves. I already caught a fence post 3 times. The morning wore on, chores blending into play and back again. Thomas found himself drawn into this rhythm, this easy flow between work and life. Mary never seemed to stop moving, feeding chickens, checking the garden, mending a broken gate, but she always had an eye on Sarah, always ready with a word of guidance or caution. It was during the noon meal, cold beef and yesterday's bread, simple but filling, that Sarah asked, "Are you staying forever now?" Thomas's hand stilled. He looked at Mary, who was carefully not looking at either of them. "I'm staying for now," he said finally. Would that be all right?" Sarah considered this with the same gravity she'd given her letters. "I suppose, but you can't have Mary's room. She needs it for her things." "I wouldn't dream of it." "And you can't make her leave." The fear under the words was clear. Thomas felt something crack in his chest. "No, sweetheart, I won't make Mary leave." "Promise." "I promise." Sarah studied him, then nodded. "All right then, can I have more bread?" Mary passed the plate, her face carefully neutral. But Thomas caught the relief in her shoulders, the slight ease of tension. She'd been worried too, he realized. Worried he'd come back to claim his house and daughter and send away the woman who'd made them both whole. After lunch, Sarah went down for her nap, protesting all the way, but asleep almost before Mary finished tucking her in. Thomas found himself alone with Mary in the kitchen again, the afternoon stretching before them. "Thank you," he said, "for this morning, for letting me be part of things." Mary wiped down the already clean table. "She needs to know you, whatever else happens. She needs that." "What do you mean, whatever else happens?" She looked at him then, direct as always. "You left once. You might leave again, but at least now she'll have some memories of you, something more than just a name and an empty chair." The words stung because they were fair. Thomas had no right to demand trust. "Not yet. I meant what I said. I'm not making you leave." "That's not your choice alone." Mary moved to the window, looking out at the garden sleeping under winter's hand. "This place, this life, I built it for her, not for me. If my being here makes things harder for you and her to find each other, then I'll go." "You're not," Thomas struggled for words. "She loves you. You're her. You're who she turns to. I saw that this morning." "Because I was here." Mary turned back to him. "But you're her blood. That matters too, whether she knows it yet or not." They stood there, two people caught in an impossible situation. Thomas thought of the woman before him, plain, practical, steadfast. Nothing like Elizabeth with her beauty and charm and quicksilver moods. But Sarah bloomed under her care. That was clear as daylight. "Stay," he said. "Whatever happens, whatever we figure out, stay. She needs you. Maybe we both do." Mary studied him for a long moment. "For now," she said finally. "We'll see what tomorrow brings." It was the best he could hope for. Thomas nodded, accepting this temporary reprieve. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. But inside was warm and safe, smelling of bread and soap and the indefinable scent of home. "I should check the stock," he said. "Been too long since I rode my own land." "Take the bay gelding, he needs the exercise. And Thomas," she used his name for the first time, making him turn back. "She naps for about an hour. She'll want to help with evening chores when she wakes." "I'll be back by then." Mary nodded, already turning to her endless work. But as Thomas headed for the door, he heard her start humming that same gentle tune from last night. The sound followed him out into the afternoon, a promise and a question both. The days settled into a rhythm, tentative as a new colt finding its legs. Thomas woke each morning to the sound of Mary in the kitchen, joined them for breakfast, watched Sarah's lessons. He threw himself into ranch work with a fervor that surprised even him, mending fences, checking cattle, all the 1,000 tasks he'd paid others to do for 5 years. But it was the evenings that haunted him most. After supper, Mary would settle in the parlor with her mending while Sarah played at her feet. Sometimes the child would crawl into Mary's lap for a story. Sometimes she'd sing to her rag doll, little snatches of that mockingbird song. And always, Thomas felt like a ghost haunting his own life, watching from the edges of something complete without him. It was near 2 weeks into this careful dance when Sarah asked, "Why don't you smile, Papa?" They were in the barn, Sarah helping him muck stalls while Mary did the washing. The question came innocent as spring rain, but it hit like thunder. "I smile," Thomas said, defensive without meaning to be. "Not real smiles. Your mouth moves, but your eyes stay sad." She leaned on her child-sized pitchfork, studying him with that unnerving directness. "Mary says you carry heavy things inside. Is that why—" Thomas's hand stilled on the shovel. "Mary says that—" "She says everybody carries things. Some people's are just heavier." Sarah resumed her work, moving hay with more enthusiasm than skill. "My heavy thing is wondering if I did something wrong to make you go away." The words knocked the breath from him. Thomas dropped to his knees in the straw, not caring about his pants. "Oh, sweetheart, no, you didn't do anything wrong." "Then why?" Her gray eyes, Elizabeth's eyes, searched his face. "Was I too loud? Did I cry too much?" "No." Thomas reached out, hesitant, and Sarah let him take her small hands in his. "I left because I was hurt. When your mama died, it hurt so bad I couldn't breathe. And every time I looked at you, I remembered. It was wrong of me, cowardly. But it was never your fault." Sarah absorbed this with that peculiar solemnity children brought to important things. Mary's husband died too, but she stayed. The comparison stung because it was apartment. Thomas thought of Mary, washing clothes with her steady hands, building a life from loss instead of running from it. "Mary's stronger than I am. Maybe you just need practice." Sarah pulled free, returning to her work. "That's what Mary says about everything. Letters and writing and being brave, it all takes practice." They worked in silence for a while, Thomas turning his daughter's words over like stones in his hand. Practice at being brave. Practice at staying. Maybe it was that simple. Maybe it wasn't. That evening, after Sarah was abed, he found himself on the porch despite the cold. The stars wheeled overhead, distant and indifferent as always. He'd sat on this same porch with Elizabeth, planning their future. Now he sat here alone, trying to figure out how to reclaim what he'd thrown away. "Can't sleep." Mary stepped out, wrapped in a shawl. She'd let her hair down for the night, and it caught the moonlight like wheat in summer. Thomas tried not to notice, but something in his chest tightened all the same. "Thinking too much," he admitted. She settled on the other end of the bench, careful distance between them. "Sarah said you talked today, in the barn. She asked why I don't smile, real smiles. She said—" Thomas laughed, but it came out cracked. 5 years old and she sees right through me. Children see clear when we let them." Mary pulled her shawl tighter. "She's been happier since you came. Didn't realize how much she needed you until you were here. She has you. I'm not her father. I'm not her blood." Mary's voice held no self-pity, just fact. "I can love her till the stars fall, but I can't give her that." They sat quiet, listening to the night sounds, a distant coyote, the restless shift of horses in the corral. Thomas found himself studying Mary's profile in the moonlight. Plain. He'd thought that first night, but there was beauty in plainness, in the steady line of her jaw and the calm of her bearing. "Tell me about him," he said. "Your husband." Mary's hands tightened on her shawl. "Why?" "Because I want to know. Because you know my grief, but I don't know yours." She was silent so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, James. His name was James Whitfield. Ran a feed store in Independence. Steady man, good with numbers. Courted me proper for 2 years before my father agreed to the match. "You loved him." "I grew to. He was kind, gentle, made me laugh with his terrible jokes." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "We had 3 years, good years, Then some men got into an argument over a debt. James tried to make peace. Got a knife in the belly for his troubles. The words came flat, like she'd told them too many times to feel them anymore. Thomas knew that tone, had used it himself when speaking of Elizabeth. I held him while he died, Mary continued. Took 3 days. Doctor said there was nothing to be done but wait. He apologized for leaving me. Can you imagine dying in agony and worried about my future? Elizabeth apologized too. Thomas said soft. For the baby. Said she was sorry she couldn't give me a son. All I wanted was for her to live. And she was apologizing for the baby's sex. They shared a look of perfect understanding. 2 people who'd watched love die slow and hard. Mary broke the gaze first, looking back at the stars. After James passed, I couldn't stay. Everywhere I looked, I saw him. So I sold everything, took what little money we had, and came west. Figured I'd start fresh where nobody knew me as the widow Whitfield. Is that what you were running from being known T? Mary considered. I was running from pity. From good folk who meant well but couldn't look at me without seeing tragedy. From my own family, who wanted me to wear black forever and never laugh again. From the weight of being someone's memory instead of my own self. Thomas felt the truth of it in his bones. Yes, that's it exactly. But then I came here, Mary went on, and found a little girl who needed someone. And suddenly I wasn't the widow Whitfield anymore. I was Miss Mary who sang songs and knew about chickens and could braid hair just right. I was needed. It saved me, I think. Sarah saved us both. Seems like maybe that's what children do. Make us better than we are because they need us to be. A cold wind swept across the porch, and Mary shivered, without thinking. Thomas shifted closer, blocking the worst of it with his body. She looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. I should go in, she said, but didn't move. Sarah asked if her mother sang to her. Thomas said sudden, I couldn't remember. Isn't that terrible, my own wife? And I couldn't remember if she sang to our baby. Grief steals things. Memories get tangled. Mary's voice was gentle. I can't remember James's laugh anymore. I know he laughed. Know I loved the sound, but I can't call it to mind. Does it get easier the forgetting? No, but you make peace with it. You learn to hold what you have and let go of what's lost. Thomas thought of Elizabeth, trying to summon her face clear and finding it blurred at the edges. Then he looked at Mary, solid and real beside him, and felt guilty for noticing how the moonlight caught in her hair. I dream about her sometimes, he admitted. Elizabeth, but lately... He stopped, unable to say that lately the dreams had been changing, that sometimes he woke confused about which woman had been singing in his sleep. You're allowed to heal, Mary said quiet. She wouldn't want you to carry this forever. How do you know what she'd want? Because she loved you enough to marry you, to have your child. Love like that doesn't wish endless pain on what it leaves behind. The words settled over him like a blanket, warm and suffocating both. Thomas wanted to believe them, wanted to think Elizabeth would forgive him for the way his eyes followed Mary through the kitchen, for the way his pulse jumped when their hands accidentally touched over the dinner dishes. It's been 3 years for you, he said. Have you? No. The word came quick and firm. Haven't wanted to. Haven't had time. Between Sarah and the ranch, haven't met anyone worth the trouble. Thomas heard what she didn't say, that there were few men who'd court a widow doing domestic work. Fewer still who'd see past her plain face to the steel beneath. Their loss, he thought, then pushed the thought away sharp. We should go in, Mary said again, and this time she stood. Early morning tomorrow. Always is. Thomas stood too, and for a moment they were close. Close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. Something passed between them, electric as summer lightning. Then Mary stepped back, wrapping her dignity around her like armor. Good night, Thomas. Good night, Mary. She slipped inside, leaving him alone with the stars and the weight of feelings he had no right to harbor. Thomas gripped the porch rail, wood rough under his palms. He'd come home to face his grief, to know his daughter. He hadn't expected this pull toward a woman who was everything Elizabeth hadn't been, who'd built the life he'd abandoned and asked nothing in return. Inside the house, he heard Mary's footsteps, the soft click of her door. She slept in the room off the kitchen like hired help, had made that choice to stay proper and right. But she was so much more than hired help now. She was the woman who'd raised his daughter, who knew when Sarah was getting a cold by the sound of her breathing, who'd painted butterflies on bedroom walls and taught a grieving child that love didn't always leave. Thomas stayed on the porch until the cold drove him in. But sleep was a long time coming. He lay in the bed he'd shared with Elizabeth, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about gentle hands and steady eyes and the way Mary had said his name in the dark. Come morning, he woke to the sound of singing. Not the mockingbird song this time, but something else, an old hymn about rivers and crossing over. Mary's voice drifted up from the kitchen, mixing with Sarah's piping attempts to follow along. Thomas lay still, caught between past and present, between the life he'd fled and the one being lived without him. He rose and dressed, each movement feeling weighted with significance. Downstairs, he found them as always, Sarah in Mary's lap, both their hands flour-dusted from biscuit making. They looked up at his entrance, twin smiles of welcome that made his chest tight. Papa! Sarah scrambled down, running to hug his legs. We're making Sunday biscuits. Mary's teaching me to cut them round. I see that. Thomas touched his daughter's head, marveling at how natural it was becoming. Save some flour for the biscuits. Little bird. Sarah giggled, the sound bright as morning. Mary calls me that too, little bird, because I sing all the time. Thomas looked at Mary, who was watching them with something soft in her eyes. Well, it fits. They worked together to finish breakfast, Thomas setting the table while Sarah chattered about her plans for the day. It was so normal, so exactly what he'd once dreamed of, that it hurt, but it was a good hurt, like circulation returning to a limb gone numb. Church today, Mary reminded them. If you're coming. Thomas hadn't been to church since Elizabeth's funeral, but looking at Sarah's eager face, he knew he'd go. I'll hitch the wagon. Can I wear my blue dress? Sarah asked Mary. The one with the buttons. If you're careful. No climbing trees before service. I never climbed trees on Sunday. What about last week? Poor Reverend Murphy near had apoplexy when you popped out of that oak. Sarah giggled again. He said it was good I was reaching toward heaven. That man's a saint, Mary muttered, but she was smiling. Thomas watched them negotiate clothing and behavior, saw how Mary guided without controlling, how Sarah trusted without thinking. This was what he'd missed, not just the big moments, but these small ones. These daily dances of love and care. I'll get the wagon ready, he said again, needing air, needing space to breathe around the fullness in his chest. Outside, the morning was crisp and bright, winter backing off toward spring. Thomas moved through the familiar motions of harnessing horses, but his mind stayed in the kitchen with flour-dusted hands and morning songs. He'd come home to face his grief. Instead, he was facing something else entirely, the possibility of happiness, the chance to build something new on the ashes of what was lost, the dangerous, delicious thought that maybe, just maybe, he could stay. The church bells started ringing across the valley, calling the faithful to worship. Thomas secured the last buckle and turned back to the house. In the doorway stood Mary and Sarah, dressed for church and backlit by morning sun. Sarah waved excited. Mary just watched, that steady gaze that saw too much and forgave it all. Ready, Mary called. Thomas looked at them, his daughter. What was Mary to him? Not his wife, not anymore, just the help. Something in between, something unnamed but essential. Ready, he said, and meant it. They climbed into the wagon together. Sarah between them chattering about everything and nothing. Mary's shoulder brushed his as she adjusted her skirts. The contact burned through layers of cloth and propriety. As they rolled toward town and church and the curious eyes of neighbors, Thomas let himself imagine what it would be like to do this every Sunday. To sit beside Mary while Sarah fidgeted between them. To be known not as the man who'd fled his grief, but as the one who'd come home to heal. It was a dangerous thought, a presumptuous thought. But as Mary started humming that mockingbird song and Sarah joined in, Thomas found himself hoping all the same. The storm came 3 days later, rolling in from the northwest like God's own fury. Thomas had seen it building all morning, the restless cattle, the yellow-green sky, the way the air went still as death before all hell broke loose. He'd gotten most of the stock into shelter, but there were still horses in the far pasture when the first fat raindrops began to fall. "Stay inside," he told Mary as he grabbed his oilcloth. "Keep Sarah away from the windows." Mary nodded, already moving to secure shutters, but Sarah had been playing with her rag doll on the porch, and in the confusion of battening down, nobody noticed she wasn't in the house. Not until the wind started howling like a wounded thing and Mary called for her to come away from the windows that weren't there. "Sarah," Mary's voice went sharp with worry. "Sarah, answer me." Thomas heard the panic rising. He dropped the rope he'd been coiling and ran inside. Rain already drumming hard on the roof. Mary stood in the parlor, face white as flour. "She's not here," Mary said. "I thought she came in, but—" The barn. Thomas was already heading for the door. "I'll check. You take the henhouse and—" A streak of yellow caught Thomas's eye through the window. Sarah's rag doll, tumbling across the yard in the wind. His blood went cold. "She went after the doll," he said, and then they were both running. The storm hit full force as they burst outside. Rain came sideways, sharp as needles. Wind tried to knock them flat. Thomas could barely see 10 feet ahead, but he could hear Mary calling Sarah's name, voice nearly lost in the roar. "The old shed," Mary yelled, pointing toward the rickety building they'd been meaning to tear down. "She plays there sometimes." They fought their way across the yard, Thomas reaching the shed first. The door hung open, banging in the wind. Inside, huddled in the corner with her doll clutched tight, was Sarah. Relief flooded through him so hard his knees nearly buckled. "Papa," she ran to him, burying her face in his chest. I'm sorry. I just wanted to save her." "Shh, it's all right." Thomas wrapped his coat around her, but as he turned to leave, the wind shrieked louder and the whole shed groaned. Mary grabbed his arm. "The roof's going." They had a heartbeat to react. Thomas shoved Sarah toward Mary as the beam above them cracked. Mary caught the child, pulling her clear as half the roof collapsed where they'd been standing. Debris rained down splintered wood, old shingles, years of accumulated dust and decay. "Out!" Thomas yelled, but the doorway was blocked now, the storm pressing the wreckage inward. Mary was already moving, heading for the far corner where a gap showed between wall and foundation. She pushed Sarah through first, then squeezed after. Thomas followed, tearing his shirt on protruding nails, not caring about anything but getting them away from the collapsing structure. They stumbled into the full force of the storm. The rain was a solid wall now, the wind strong enough to send Sarah tumbling if Mary hadn't had her tight. The house seemed impossibly far away. "Together!" Mary shouted. "Don't let go!" Thomas wrapped one arm around them both, using his body to shield them from the worst of it. Step by step, they fought toward safety. Sarah was crying, her tears lost in the rain. Mary's face was set with determination, her arms locked around the child like iron. Halfway there, Thomas's foot found a hole the old well they'd covered over but never properly filled. He went down hard, ankle twisting. Pain shot up his leg like fire. Mary reached for him without loosening her grip on Sarah. "Go," he waved them on. "Get her inside." Mary's eyes blazed. "We don't leave anyone behind," She shifted Sarah to one arm, how a woman so slight could be so strong. Thomas would never understand and hauled him up with the other. Together. The three of them limped and stumbled the rest of the way to the house. They burst through the kitchen door in a tangle of limbs and rain and relief. Mary kicked it shut behind them, shutting out the howling storm. For a moment, they just stood there, dripping and gasping. Then Sarah started sobbing in earnest. I'm sorry, my doll. Hush, little bird. Mary sank to the floor right there in the puddle they were making, pulling Sarah into her lap. You're safe. That's all that matters. Thomas lowered himself beside them, his ankles screaming protest. Sarah's doll was a sodden mess, but clutched tight in her small fists. He thought of how close they'd come to losing her over a toy, and something fierce and protective rose in his chest. Don't ever do that again, he said, rougher than he meant to. You hear me, nothing, no toy, no animal, nothing is worth risking yourself. Sarah's sobs got louder. Mary shot him a look and gentled her voice. Your papa's right, sweetheart. We were so scared when we couldn't find you. You mean more to us than all the dolls in the world. But she was scared. Sarah hiccuped. She was all alone in the wind. Thomas met Mary's eyes over Sarah's head. Seeing his own thought reflected there, how could you argue with a heart that tender, even misguided? It came from love. Next time, Mary said carefully, you come tell us first. We'll help save what needs saving, together. All right? Sarah nodded, burrowing deeper into Mary's embrace. Thunder crashed overhead, rattling the windows. The three of them huddled there on the kitchen floor, rain pooling around them, but safe, whole. Your ankle, Mary said, noticing how Thomas held it. Twisted, not broken, I don't think. Let me see. She shifted Sarah to his lap and, oh, the weight of his daughter. The trust as she curled into him and examined his ankle with gentle hands. Swollen already, we need to wrap it. She rose, all business now, fetching towels and her medical box. Sarah clung to Thomas, her tears tapering to sniffles. He held her close, breathing in the smell of rain and child and home. I was scared, Sarah whispered. Me too, baby girl, me too. But you came. You and Mary both came. Always, Thomas said, and meant it. We'll always come for you. Mary returned with supplies and dry clothes. She wrapped Thomas's ankle with practiced efficiency, then took Sarah to get changed. Thomas managed to hobble to his room for dry things, though every step was agony. By the time he made it back to the kitchen, Mary had hot coffee brewing and Sarah wrapped in a quilt by the stove. The storm raged on outside, but inside was warm and safe. Mary had changed into a dry dress, her hair coming loose from its pins. She moved around the kitchen, making comfort with her hands hot drinks, warm food, the familiar rituals of home. The shed's gone, Thomas said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Good riddance. It was a hazard. Mary's voice was steady, but he saw how her hands shook slightly. The aftermath of fear. Mary saved us, Sarah announced from her cocoon of quilts. She pulled me through the hole and then she helped Papa up, and she's the strongest person in the whole world. That she is, Thomas agreed, watching Mary's cheeks pink. We saved each other, Mary corrected. That's what families do. The word hung in the air, families. Sarah accepted it without question, but Thomas saw Mary realize what she'd said, saw her busy herself with unnecessary tasks to cover the moment. Thunder crashed again, and Sarah whimpered. Without thinking, Thomas opened his arm, and she scurried over to burrow against his side. Mary hesitated, then sat on Sarah's other side, close enough that Thomas could feel her warmth. Tell us a story. Sarah demanded, a storm story. Mary looked at Thomas. He nodded. So she began, weaving a tale about a little girl who could talk to the wind, who learned that storms weren't mean but just didn't know their own strength. Sarah listened, rapt, slowly relaxing as Mary's voice worked its magic. Thomas found himself watching Mary as she spoke. Her hair was drying in waves around her face. She had a scrape on her cheek from their escape. Her hands moved as she talked, painting pictures in the air. This woman who'd risked everything to save a child that wasn't even hers, who'd refused to leave him behind, who'd built a refuge in this house that had known too much sorrow. The oil lamp flickered, casting moving shadows. Outside, the storm began to ease, its fury spent. Sarah's breathing had gone deep and even, asleep despite her determination to hear the story's end. "She's out," Thomas said soft. Mary stopped mid-sentence, looking down at Sarah with such tenderness it made his chest ache. "Poor mite, she was terrified." "You were magnificent." The words came out without planning. "The way you got her out, got us both safe. You shielded us from the worst of it. Your back must be torn to pieces from those nails." Thomas shrugged, though, truth be told, he was starting to feel every scrape and bruise. "Worth it." They sat quiet, Sarah sleeping between them. The storm had passed, leaving only gentle rain pattering on the roof. In the lamplight, Mary looked younger, softer. A strand of hair had fallen across her cheek. Without thinking, Thomas reached over and tucked it behind her ear. Mary went very still. Their eyes met and held, something electric passing between them. Thomas's hand lingered, fingertips barely grazing her cheek. Mary's lips parted slightly, and he found himself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than thought. "Thomas," she whispered, and he didn't know if it was warning or invitation. Sarah stirred between them, mumbling something about mockingbirds. The spell broke. Mary stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. "I should. The storm's passed. I should check the damage." "Mary, wait." But she was already moving toward the door, needing distance, needing air that didn't crackle with possibility. Thomas let her go, his hand still tingling from the touch of her skin. Sarah curled closer in Mary's absence, and Thomas held her tight. Through the window, he could see Mary in the yard, surveying the wreckage of the shed. Her shoulders were square, her head high, standing alone as she'd probably stood through every storm for 3 years. But she didn't have to stand alone anymore. None of them did. The realization hit him like lightning he loved her. Not the memory of Elizabeth, not the ghost he'd been chasing, but this woman, this flesh and blood woman who sang to his daughter and saved them both and made him want to be better than he was. The feeling terrified him. But as he watched Mary prod the rubble with a stick, practical even in the aftermath of near disaster, Thomas thought maybe being terrified was all right. Maybe that's what courage was, being scared and staying anyway. Sarah sighed in her sleep, safe in his arms, outside. Mary began dragging boards clear of the path. In a minute, he'd go help her. His ankle could take it. They'd work together to clean up the mess, to rebuild what the storm had torn down. But for now, Thomas held his daughter and watched the woman he loved through rain-streaked glass, and felt something inside him finally start to heal. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by young Jim Watson from town along with the weekly mail. Mary was in the garden, coaxing early vegetables from the reluctant spring soil. When she saw the boy riding up, she straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. A flutter of unease in her chest. Letters rarely brought good news in her experience. "Morning, Miss Mary," Jim called out, full of 14-year-old importance. "Got mail for the Mallory place. This one says urgent." Mary took the envelope, noting the careful script, the quality paper. It was addressed to Thomas, but the return address made her blood run cold. Whitfield and Associates, Independence, Missouri. "Thank you, Jim. Will you stay for water cookies?" "Can't today, ma'am. Got 6 more stops." He tipped his hat and was gone, leaving Mary standing in the garden with the past in her hands. She found Thomas in the barn, showing Sarah how to oil leather properly. They were laughing at something, heads bent together over a bridal, and the sight made her heart clench. In the weeks since the storm, something had shifted between all of them. The careful distance she'd maintained for 3 years had eroded like spring ice, leaving her vulnerable to hopes she had no business harboring. "Letter came," she said from the doorway. Thomas looked up, smiling until he saw her face. "What's wrong?" "It's from Independence, the Whitfield Law Office." She held it out, watched recognition dawn in his eyes. He knew that name she'd told him her married name that night on the porch. What he didn't know was that James's brother ran the family law firm now. What he didn't know was why they'd be writing here. "Sarah, go collect the eggs," Thomas said. "But we're not done." "Go on, little bird. We'll finish later." Sarah went, but not without casting curious looks back at them. When she was gone, Thomas took the letter, turning it over in his hands. "Could be nothing," he said. "Could be," but Mary's voice said she didn't believe it. Thomas broke the seal, read quickly. His face went very still. "It's from a Mr. Charles Whitfield. Says he's your brother-in-law." "Former," Mary corrected, though it hardly mattered now. "He says—" Thomas looked up at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "He says he has information about your connection to the Mallory family. Says his father kept certain documents that have recently come to light. He's asking if you want them sent here or if you'll come collect them." Mary sank onto a hay bale, legs suddenly unsteady. "I never told them where I went." "How did they find you?" "I've been sending money." The admission came hard. "To James's mother. She's elderly, has no one else. I couldn't just... I've been sending what I could spare. Never put a return address, but I suppose Charles could have traced the postmarks." Thomas sat beside her, letter loose in his hands. "What documents?" "Mary. What connection to my family?" She'd known this moment would come, had dreaded it, planned for it, tried to prepare words that would make sense. Now, faced with Thomas's patient confusion, all her rehearsed explanations crumbled. "My maiden name," she said finally. "It was Garrison." "Garrison?" Thomas frowned, searching memory. "I don't—" "Elijah Garrison, from Kansas." She saw the moment he remembered. His father had told the story often how young Elijah Garrison had saved his life during the border wars, taking a bullet meant for a Mallory. How the debt had never been properly repaid because Elijah died of his wounds 3 days later, leaving a widow and children. "Your father," Mary nodded. "I was 6 when he died. Barely remember him. But Mama kept all his papers, his letters, including the ones from your father, promising that if ever a Garrison needed help, the Mallory family would provide it." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You knew. When you came here, you knew who I was." "No." Mary met his eyes steadily. "I knew who your father was. I came here because I was desperate and remembered those old letters. Mrs. Henderson hired me because I could work, not because of any 20-year-old promise. I never told her who I was. Never told anyone." "Why?" "Because I wanted to earn my place. Because charity chokes worse than hunger sometimes. Because—" She stopped, then forced herself to continue. "Because I was afraid if you knew, you'd feel obligated. The Mallorys paying their debt to the Garrisons. I couldn't bear to be that." Thomas stood abruptly, pacing to the barn door. Mary watched his back, the rigid line of his shoulders, and felt her heart breaking. She'd built something real here, something good, and now it would all be seen through the lens of old debts and family honor. 3 years, Thomas said without turning. 3 years you've been here, and you never said anything. What would it have changed? Sarah needed tending. The house needed managing. Would knowing my father's name have made me better at either? He turned then, and she was surprised to see not anger but hurt in his eyes. It would have made you family. It would have meant you belonged here by right, not just by hire. I earned my place, Mary said fiercely. Every day. I earned it. With work and love and choosing to stay when things were hard, that means more than any old debt. Does it? Thomas came back to her, standing close enough that she had to tilt her head to see his face. Is that why you kept your distance so careful? Why you sleep in the servant's room and call me Mr. Mallory in town? Because you didn't want to be here by right? I didn't want to presume. Presume what, that I might see you as more than the help that I might? He stopped, jaw working. Might what? The words came out whispered. Christ, Mary. Thomas's hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Don't you know? Can't you see what you've come to mean to us, to me? Mary's breath caught. She'd imagined this moment too many times, had ruthlessly crushed the hope of it. Now, with his hand warm on her face and his eyes saying things his words hadn't yet, she found herself frozen. The storm, Thomas continued, voice rough. When I thought we might lose Sarah, when you wouldn't leave me behind, I knew then, maybe before then, but I was too much a coward to see it. You're not here because of any debt. You're here because you belong here, because Sarah loves you, because I... Don't... Mary pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. Don't say it because you found out my father saved yours. Don't make this about obligation. Is that what you think that I'd confuse duty with? Thomas laughed, short and bitter. I'm saying this all wrong. Mary, Papa Mary, Sarah's voice carried from outside. Are you in there? I got all the eggs. Mary moved first, needing distance, needing air that didn't smell like hay and leather and Thomas. She met Sarah at the door, admiring her careful basket of eggs, listening to her chatter about which hen was being stubborn. Normal things, safe things. But Thomas followed, and she could feel his gaze on her like a physical touch. The rest of the day passed in careful avoidance. Mary threw herself into household tasks while Thomas worked outside. Sarah, sensitive as always to adult moods, grew quieter as the hours passed. At dinner, the silence was thick enough to cut. Finally, Sarah had enough. Why is everyone mad? No one's mad, sweetheart, Mary said. You're using your church voice, and Papa keeps staring at you when you're not looking. She turned to Thomas. Did Mary do something wrong? No, Thomas said firmly. Mary could never do anything wrong. Then why... Sarah Jane Mallory, Mary interrupted, using the child's full name. Eat your carrots. Sarah subsided, but her reproachful looks made it clear she wasn't fooled. After she was abed, Mary tried to escape to her room, but Thomas intercepted her in the kitchen. We need to finish this conversation. There's nothing to finish. You know the truth now. I'll write to Charles. Tell him to burn whatever papers he has. It doesn't matter anymore. Doesn't matter. Thomas caught her hand as she tried to pass. Mary, it all matters, but not the way you think. Please. She hated how her voice broke. Just let me be. Tomorrow we can pretend this never happened. Go back to how things were. I don't want to go back. His grip on her hand tightened. I want to go forward. I want to court you proper. If you'll let me. I want to stop pretending that I come to the kitchen early just for coffee when really it's to see you first thing. I want to sit beside you at church without wondering what people think. I want... What you want is to pay a debt, Mary said, pulling free. Your father couldn't save mine, so now you'll save me. Marry the poor garrison girl. Give her a home. Balance the ledger. Thomas's face darkened. You think so little of me that I'd offer marriage out of obligation. I think grief makes us reach for comfort wherever we find it. I think guilt makes us see love where there's only gratitude. I think you're scared. Thomas stepped closer, backing her against the kitchen table. I think you've spent 3 years telling yourself you don't deserve anything more than what you've got. I think you use that debt like armor, keeping yourself apart so you can't be hurt again. Stop! But the word came out breathless. I buried my wife 5 years ago, Thomas said, relentless. I ran from my daughter because she had Elizabeth's eyes. I know about using grief as a shield, Mary, but I also know about healing, about finding something worth staying for, about falling in love with the last person I expected. Thomas, I love you. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Not because your father saved mine, not because you saved my daughter. I love you because you hum when you work, because you laugh at Sarah's terrible jokes, because you're stubborn as a mule and twice as strong, because you made this empty house a home. Mary's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. I'm nobody special, just a widow who knows about chickens and children. You're everything. Thomas's voice went soft. You're the woman who sings my daughter to sleep, who faces down storms without flinching, who keeps sending money to her dead husband's mother because it's right. You're brave and true and good, and I love you for all of it. What about Elizabeth? What about her? Thomas's hand came up to wipe away the tear that had escaped down Mary's cheek. I loved my wife. Part of me always will. But she's gone. And I'm here. And my heart's big enough for past and present both. The question is whether you'll have me. Not for duty or debt or any damn thing except that I love you and want to build a life with you. Mary looked up at him. This man who'd come home broken and was slowly mending, who'd learned to smile again watching his daughter chase chickens, who looked at her like she was precious, not because of her name, but because of who she was. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Terrified, if you want the truth. But Mary, he framed her face with both hands now, gentle as if she might bolt. Being scared together has got to be better than being scared alone. A laugh escaped her, watery but real. That might be the worst proposal in the history of Texas. Haven't proposed yet, Thomas pointed out. When I do, I'll do it right, with flowers and probably stammering and Sarah likely offering commentary. But first I need to know, is there hope can I court you as Mary, not as a garrison or a debt or any other damn thing? Mary thought of all the reasons to say no. The gossip it would cause, the complexity of going from employee to wife, the fear of losing again, of trusting her heart to someone who'd already proved he could leave. Then she thought of Sarah, asleep upstairs, who called her mama in her dreams, of this man who'd faced down his demons to come home, of the life they were already building, meal by meal, day by day. Yes, she whispered. Thomas's smile was like sunrise. Yes, you can court me. But Thomas, she put her hand over his, I won't be rushed. I won't be pushed. And if you ever make me feel like Charity, you'll feed me to the chickens. Thomas finished. I know. I wouldn't expect anything less. He leaned down, and for a moment Mary thought he might kiss her, but he pressed his lips to her forehead instead, gentle and reverent as a prayer. We'll do this right, he promised, however long it takes. Mary closed her eyes, letting herself lean into him just for a moment. Tomorrow would bring questions and challenges and Charles Whitfield's documents to deal with. But tonight, in this kitchen that had become the heart of their makeshift family, she let herself believe in the possibility of happiness. Mary, Thomas said against her hair. The letter from Charles, we should probably read what else it says. She laughed despite everything. Ever practical. One of us has to be. They sat at the kitchen table, the letter between them. Charles's news was straightforward. He'd found his father's papers while settling the estate. Among them were letters from Thomas's father, not just promising aid, but speaking warmly of Elijah, calling him the son he'd never had. There was even a codicil to his will, leaving a sum to any garrison who might need it. He never told me, Thomas said wonderingly. My father never mentioned any of this. Maybe he didn't know how. Men of that generation? Mary shrugged. Love came harder to their tongues than to their hearts. Thomas folded the letter carefully. What do you want to do about it? Nothing. Let the past bury the past. We have enough to deal with in the present. Agreed. He stood, offered her his hand. Walk with me just to the porch. I promise to be a perfect gentleman." Mary took his hand, letting him lead her outside. The night was clear. Stars scattered like spilled salt across the sky. They sat on the bench, close but not quite touching, and Mary felt something inside her finally unclench. "This is real," she asked the darkness. "Not just loneliness or convenience or—" "It's real," Thomas assured her. "Real as rain, as Sarah says." Mary smiled at that. Trust Sarah to have worked her way into every corner of their lives, binding them together with her need and her love and her terrible jokes about chickens. "All right then," she said. "Court me, Thomas Mallory. But fair warning, I'm out of practice at being wooed." "Good thing I'm out of practice at wooing. We'll muddle through together." And sitting there under the vast Texas sky, her past settled and her future uncertain but bright with possibility, Mary Whitfield thought that muddling through together sounded just about perfect. The whispers started at Sunday service, soft as snake rattles in dry grass. Mary felt them more than heard them, the quick glances, the hushed conversations that died when she passed. She kept her head high, Sarah's hand in hers, but each look was like a needle finding soft flesh. "Is it true, Mrs.?" Abigail Harding cornered her after church, voice dripping honey over poison. "About you and Mr. Mallory, such a convenient arrangement." "I don't know what you mean," Mary said, though of course she did. "Oh, my dear." Abigail's smile was sharp as broken glass. "A young widow, keeping house for a wealthy widower. And now I hear he's courting you properly, though one wonders if properly is quite the word, given the circumstances." Sarah tugged at Mary's skirt. "Can we go home now?" "In a moment, little bird." Mary turned back to Abigail, keeping her voice level. "Mr. Mallory has indeed expressed his intentions. Everything is entirely proper, with Mrs. Henderson as chaperone when she's well enough." "Of course." Abigail's eyes glittered. "Though one does wonder what the poor man's late wife would think. Elizabeth was such a lady, so refined, so different from present company." The barb hit true, but Mary had taken worse. She smiled, bland as milk. "How kind of you to concern yourself with our welfare, Mrs. Harding. I'll be sure to mention your interest to Thomas." She left Abigail sputtering, but the damage was done. By the time they reached the wagon where Thomas waited, Mary had heard her name linked with words like calculating and opportunistic, and worst of all, gold digger. "Everything all right?" Thomas asked, helping them up. "Fine," Mary lied. But Sarah, with her uncanny ability to sense adult troubles, piped up. "Mrs. Harding was being mean about you courting Mary. She said Mary was calculating." She sounded out the word carefully. "What's that mean?" Thomas's face darkened. "It means Mrs. Harding should mind her own business." "Thomas," Mary warned. The last thing they needed was him making a scene. The ride home was quiet, but Mary could feel Thomas's anger radiating like heat from a stove. Once Sarah ran off to change from her church clothes. He turned to her. "What else did she say?" "Nothing worth repeating." "Mary." "She wondered what Elizabeth would think," Mary said flatly. "Made sure I knew how refined and ladylike your wife was. How different from present company." Thomas's hands clenched. "That bitter old—" "She's not wrong." Mary moved to the stove, needing something to do with her hands. "Elizabeth was a lady. I'm just—" "Don't!" Thomas crossed to her, turning her to face him. "Don't let their poison in." "It's not poison if it's true. I am different. I'm working class, always have been. My hands are rough. I know more about chickens than china patterns. "You're worth 10 of Elizabeth," Thomas said fiercely. Mary pulled back, shocked. "Don't say that." "Why? Because she's dead, because it's not proper." Thomas laughed, bitter. "You want to know the truth. Elizabeth hated it here. hated the dust and the work and the isolation. She wanted to go back east, talked about it constantly. The only reason we stayed was pride, mine and hers both. Too stubborn to admit we'd made a mistake. Thomas. She was beautiful and refined and utterly miserable. And she made me miserable too, though I'd have died before admitting it. We barely spoke those last months except to argue. He ran a hand through his hair. I loved her, God help me. But we were wrong for each other. Wrong for this life. Mary sank into a chair, trying to reconcile this with the sainted Elizabeth she'd imagined. Why didn't you ever say? Because it felt like betrayal. Because she died trying to give me the son I wanted. Because guilt's easier than complicated truth. Thomas knelt before her chair, taking her work-worn hands in his. But you're right for this life. Right for Sarah. Right for me. And I'll be damned if I'll let Abigail Harding or anyone else make you doubt that. People will talk. They already are. Let them. It's not that simple. Sarah has to live in this town, go to school here. If they think I'm some sort of scheming, then we'll set them straight. Thomas's jaw set stubborn, starting with Mrs. Henderson. As if summoned, they heard a buggy approaching. Mrs. Henderson had returned from her sister's that morning, still weak but insisting she needed to check on things. She entered the kitchen leaning heavy on her cane, but her eyes were sharp as ever. Land sakes, you two look like you're planning a funeral. What's happened? Sarah burst in before anyone could answer. Mrs. Harding was mean to Mary at church. She said Mary was after Papa's money. Mrs. Henderson's face went grim. Did she now? Among other things, Mary admitted. The older woman lowered herself into a chair with a grunt. That woman's had her nose out of joint ever since her own daughter failed to catch Thomas's eye. Probably hoped he'd stay away forever so she could start fresh with her younger girl. That's not, Mary started. That's exactly what this is about. Mrs. Henderson fixed them both with a stern look. Now, I've held my tongue these weeks, watching you two dance around each other like skittish colts. But if you're going to court proper, we need to set some things straight. She turned to Thomas first. Your intentions are honorable. Completely. And you, she looked at Mary. You're accepting his suit of your own free will, not from obligation or necessity. Mary felt heat rise in her cheeks. Yes, good. Then here's what we'll do. Mrs. Henderson became all business. First, I'm moving back to the house full-time. My sister's on the mend, and you need a proper chaperone if we're to quiet the gossips. Second, Mary keeps her wages same as always. No one will say she's beholden. Third, we make it clear this courtship will be conducted with all proper forms observed. I don't care about forms, Thomas protested. You might not, but Mary does, and so does this town. Mrs. Henderson's voice brooked no argument. You want to protect her reputation. Then we do this right. Sunday dinners together, supervised. Walks with Sarah as chaperone. Church socials where everyone can see there's nothing hole and corner about it. For how long? Thomas asked. 6 months minimum. Long enough to prove this isn't some wild passion, but a thoughtful decision. 6 months, Sarah wailed. But I want Mary to be my mama now. The adults froze. Sarah clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide. I mean, I didn't. She looked between them, tears starting. I'm sorry. Oh, little bird. Mary opened her arms, and Sarah flew into them. You have nothing to be sorry for. But you're not my mama. My mama's dead. I'm not supposed to want another one. Mary looked helplessly at Thomas over Sarah's head. He came to them, wrapping them both in his embrace. Your mama loved you fierce, he said into Sarah's hair, and she'd want you to have all the love you can find in this world. It's all right to love Mary. It's all right to want her to stay forever. Really? Really? Sarah pulled back, looking between them with wet eyes. And you'll stay, even if people are mean. Wild horses couldn't drag me away. Mary promised. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat, but Mary caught the sheen of tears in her eyes too. Well then, that's settled. Now, Sarah, go wash your face. We've got Sunday dinner to prepare. Sarah went, considerably cheered. Mrs. Henderson hauled herself up, fixing Thomas with a look. You'll go to town tomorrow. Make it clear to anyone who'll listen that this courtship is proper and protected. Any slight to Mary is a slight to the entire Mallory household. Yes, ma'am. And you, she turned to Mary, will hold your head high and give them nothing to gossip about. You're a good woman, Mary Whitfield. Don't let anyone tell you different. She stumped off to her room, leaving Thomas and Mary alone. 6 months, Thomas said ruefully. It's for the best. Sarah needs time to adjust. So do we. Mary hesitated, then added, So does the town. I don't give a damn about the town. But I do. This is our home, where we'll raise Sarah, where we'll build a life. I won't have it poisoned by gossip and speculation. Thomas sighed but nodded. You're right, as usual. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. But Mary, those 6 months start now, and when they're done, I'm marrying you with or without the town's blessing. Thomas, I mean it. I've wasted too much time already on other people's opinions. I won't waste more. He released her hand reluctantly. Now, I better go check the stock before Mrs. Henderson comes back and finds us alone. He left, and Mary stood in the kitchen touching her palm where his lips had been. 6 months. She could survive 6 months of gossip and speculation. She'd survived worse. The next few weeks proved her both right and wrong. Some folks, like Reverend Murphy and his wife, were genuinely pleased. About time that house had some happiness again. Mrs. Murphy said, pressing Mary's hand after service. Others were less kind. Whispers followed her through the mercantile. Conversations stopped when she entered the post office. Even Sarah noticed, coming home from her first day at the school term with troubled eyes. Susie Harding says you're not good enough for us, she reported over dinner. She says her mama told her you're trying to steal our money. That's enough, Thomas said sharply. But Sarah wasn't done. I told her she was stupid and mean and that you love Mary for true, not for money. Then I put mud in her lunch pail. Sarah Jane, Mary exclaimed, though part of her wanted to applaud. Violence isn't the answer, Mrs. Henderson said sternly. But Mary caught her hiding a smile. What is the answer then? Sarah demanded. When people are mean and tell lies. Mary exchanged looks with Thomas. Living well, she said finally. Showing them through our actions that their words are wrong. Being so happy and good that their meanness looks small in comparison. That sounds hard. Most worthwhile things are. And it was hard. Hard to smile when the banker's wife crossed the street to avoid her. Hard to keep her temper when she overheard someone wondering loudly what tricks she'd used to catch Thomas's attention. Hardest of all when an anonymous note appeared under the door, suggesting she'd be happier with her own kind back in Missouri. Thomas was furious about the note, ready to tear the town apart to find who'd written it. But Mary burned it in the stove and told him to let it be. They want us to react, she said, to prove we're as low as they think. I won't give them the satisfaction. How are you so calm? Mary thought of all the times she'd been dismissed, overlooked, made small. Practice, she said simply. But she wasn't always calm. Some nights she lay awake wondering if she was being selfish, if her presence would make things harder for Sarah and Thomas in the long run. Maybe it would be better to leave, to find work elsewhere, to let Thomas court someone more suitable. Then morning would come, and Sarah would crawl into her lap for breakfast, and Thomas would smile at her over coffee. And she knew she could never leave. This was her family. Gossip be damned. The turning point came unexpected. Mrs. Harding's younger daughter Clara, the one she'd hoped would catch Thomas, ran off with a traveling salesman. The scandal was enormous notes left behind. Family jewelry missing. Abigail Harding taking to her bed with vapors. Shouldn't gloat, Mrs., Henderson said. But her knitting needles clicked with satisfaction. Mary felt only pity. That poor girl, driven to desperation by her mother's scheming. Poor girl nothing, Thomas said. She made her choice. Like I made mine, Mary asked quietly. Running away from home to start over, taking work where I could find it, if things had been different. If you hadn't needed someone for Sarah. Don't, Thomas caught her shoulders. You're nothing like Clara Harding. Aren't I a woman alone, making pragmatic choices? You came here to work, to build something, not to steal and run. His hands gentled. Mary, you have to stop seeing yourself through their eyes. She knew he was right, but knowledge and feeling were different things, and some wounds went deep. Then came the day when Sarah took sick, nothing serious, just a summer cold, but she was miserable with it. Mary sat up all night, cooling her fever, singing soft songs, coaxing honey water between cracked lips. Thomas found them there at dawn. Sarah finally sleeping peaceful in Mary's arms. How is she? Better. Fever broke an hour ago. Mary's voice was hoarse from singing. You should rest. I'll take her. No. Mary's arms tightened instinctively. She needs to sleep sound. I'm fine. Thomas brought her coffee, held it to her lips so she didn't have to let go of Sarah. The intimacy of it, the simple care, made her throat tight. The Hardings' middle boy fell through the ice last winter, Thomas said quietly. Nearly drowned. Abigail was at some society meeting in town. Couldn't be bothered to come home. The boy lived, but he's never been quite right since weak lungs, they say. Mary looked at him, not understanding the connection. You've been up all night for a summer cold. Thomas continued, singing her through the worst of it. Being here, that's the difference. Mary, that's why you belong and they don't. So, Mrs. Henderson could have... Mrs. Henderson's joints barely let her climb stairs anymore. Besides, Sarah doesn't want Mrs. Henderson when she's sick. She wants you. He paused. We both do. Before Mary could respond, they heard footsteps on the porch. Thomas went to check, came back looking grim. What is it? Half the town. Seems like word got out Sarah was sick. He helped Mary stand. Took Sarah carefully. They've brought food, medicine, Mrs. Murphy's here, and the widow Patterson. And you'll never believe it, Abigail Harding. Mary smoothed her hair, straightened her wrinkled dress. I must look. You look like a mother who's been up all night with a sick child. Come on. The kitchen was indeed full of women. Mrs. Henderson directing traffic from her chair. They'd brought soup and fresh bread, fever tonics and clean linens. But what struck Mary was how they looked at her not with judgment but with recognition. Mothers who'd kept their own vigils, who knew the weight of a sick child in their arms. Heard the little one was poorly. Mrs., Murphy said, pressing a jar of honey into Mary's hands. This is good for the throat. My own receipt for fever, the widow Patterson added, producing a brown bottle. Worked on all 6 of mine. Even Abigail Harding, diminished by her own troubles, managed civility. Children are so fragile, she said, and for once there was no poison in it. Is there anything else you need? No, thank you, all of you. Mary felt overwhelmed by the sudden kindness. The women dispersed gradually, leaving their offerings and good wishes. Mrs. Henderson smiled from her chair. See, they just needed to see who you really are. Not the widow looking to better herself, but the woman who loves that child true. Mary sank into a chair, exhausted and emotional. Through the window, she saw Thomas carrying Sarah upstairs, his big hands gentle as he navigated the narrow steps. I was ready to leave, she admitted, if it would have been better for them. Hush that nonsense, Mrs. Henderson's voice was firm. "You're exactly where you need to be. Those two were dying by inches before you came." "Now look at them," Thomas smiling again. "Sarah blooming like a prairie flower. You did that." "They did it themselves. You just loved them. Don't minimize that. Love's the hardest work there is." Mary thought about that as she climbed the stairs to check on Sarah. Love as work, yes, that fit. The daily choice to stay, to care, to build something from the ashes of old grief. She found Thomas sitting by Sarah's bed, watching her sleep. "Room for one more," Mary whispered. He shifted, making space on the edge of the bed. Mary sat, feeling the warmth of him against her side. "They were kind," she said. "The women." "You sound surprised." "I am a little, after all the whispers." "People are complicated," Thomas said. "They can be petty about courtship and generous about sick children, small about social climbing and big about real need." Sarah stirred, opening heavy eyes. "Mary." "I'm here, little bird." "My throat hurts." "I know, Mrs. Murphy brought special honey for it." "Will you sing the mockingbird song?" Mary glanced at Thomas, who nodded. So she sang, soft and low, about mockingbirds and diamond rings and all the promises love makes. Sarah's eyes drifted shut again, but her hand found Mary's and held tight. "Don't leave," she mumbled. "Ever." "Never," Mary promised, and meant it. Whatever came gossip or acceptance, hard times or good, this was her place. Here in this room with this man and this child, building a life from the pieces of old pain. 6 months suddenly seemed both too long and not nearly long enough. But they'd manage it. They'd already managed worse. Outside, the Texas sun climbed higher, burning off the morning dew. Inside, a family not yet official but real all the same kept watch over their smallest member, bound together by choice and tenderness and the daily work of love. The morning Mary decided to leave dawned clear and cold, frost silvering the grass like scattered diamonds. She'd lain awake all night, turning the decision over like a worry stone. But Mrs. Harding's visit the previous evening had made everything clear. "I come in Christian charity," Abigail had said, settling her skirts in Mary's clean kitchen like a crow arranging its feathers. "To warn you, woman to woman." Mary had known then, had felt it in her bones, nothing good would follow those words. "My husband's business partners in Dallas, they've made inquiries about you." Abigail's smile was sharp as winter wind. "About your late husband's difficulties, the debts, the way he died." "James died honorably, trying to stop a fight. That's one version." Abigail examined her gloves. "Another is that he owed money to dangerous men, that the fight was about his gambling debts, that you fled Missouri not from grief but from creditors." Mary's hands had stilled on the bread she was kneading. "That's a lie." "Is it? Can you prove it? Because that's what's being whispered now? That you're here under false pretenses, that poor Thomas is being deceived by a woman fleeing scandal." Abigail stood, satisfied as a cat with cream. "I thought you should know, for the child's sake." Now, in the pre-dawn darkness, Mary packed her few possessions with numb fingers. Her mother's Bible, the ribbons Sarah had given her for her birthday, the small wildflower Thomas had pressed between pages of Shakespeare, given to her shyly just last week. She couldn't stay, not with these new rumors poisoning the well. Thomas would defend her. She knew. But at what cost? Sarah starting school with whispers following her, Thomas's business relationship strained Mrs. Henderson's reputation tarnished by association. Better to leave now, before the damage spread, before Thomas felt honor-bound to stand by her against all reason, before Sarah got more attached than she already was. Mary left the letter on the kitchen table. Words she'd labored over for hours. "Thomas, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The rumors about James have followed me here, twisted into something ugly. I cannot let them touch you or Sarah. Please tell her I love her. Tell her this isn't her fault. Take care of each other. You deserve better than a woman with shadows at her heels. M. She slipped out the kitchen door like a thief, carpetbag in hand. The stage to Austin left at dawn. She'd saved enough for the fare. From there, maybe California. Somewhere far enough that the past couldn't follow. But she'd only made it to the garden gate when a small voice stopped her cold. "Where are you going?" Sarah stood on the porch in her nightgown, bare feet on frozen boards, clutching her rag doll. In the moonlight, she looked like a ghost child, all eyes and wild hair. "Little bird, you'll catch your death. Go back inside." "Not until you tell me where you're going." Sarah's chin jutted stubborn. "You're wearing your traveling dress. You have your bag." Mary's heart cracked. "I have to go away for a while." "No." The word came flat and final. "You promised. You said wild horses couldn't drag you away." Sometimes grown-ups have to break promises, for good reasons. "What reasons?" Sarah advanced down the steps, fierce as a small warrior. "What's more important than us?" "Protecting you, keeping you safe from ugly words and—" "I don't care about words." Sarah's voice rose. "Susie Harding says mean things every day. I don't care. Why do you—" "It's more complicated than that." "No, it's not." Sarah reached the gate, grabbed Mary's skirt with both hands. "You're scared. Like Papa was scared. But he came back. He stayed even though it was hard. Why won't you—" Mary knelt, setting down her bag to cup Sarah's cold face. "Because I love you too much to let my troubles hurt you." "That's stupid." Tears ran down Sarah's cheeks, but her voice stayed fierce. "Love means staying. Love means being together even when bad things happen. You taught me that. Sarah, if you leave, I'll never sing again." The words came out in a rush. "Never, not the Mockingbird song or morning songs or any songs. I'll be quiet forever and it will be your fault." "You don't mean that." "I do. I'll be so sad I'll forget how to be happy. Papa will go back to frowning all the time. The house will be cold and quiet and awful, just like before you came." Sarah's hands twisted in Mary's skirt. "Please, please don't make us go back to that." Mary felt her resolve crumbling. This child, this precious girl who'd already lost so much. How could she add to that grief? "What's going on here?" Thomas's voice made them both jump. He stood in the doorway, hair mussed from sleep, taking in the scene. Mary in her traveling clothes, bag at her feet. Sarah clinging desperate. His face went very still. "Going somewhere. Mary." "I left a letter." "I don't want a letter. I want an explanation." He came down the steps, lifting Sarah into his arms. She buried her face in his neck, shoulders shaking with sobs. "What happened?" Mrs. Harding came yesterday, while you were in town. She said, there are rumors about James, about why I left Missouri. Ugly rumors that will hurt you both if I stay." "And you believed her?" "It doesn't matter if they're true. What matters is people will talk. Sarah will suffer. Your business." "To hell with my business." The profanity made Sarah's head come up. Thomas never cursed. "And to hell with Abigail Harding and her poisonous tongue." "Thomas." "No, you don't get to run without hearing me out." He shifted Sarah to one arm, reaching for Mary with the other. "Come inside. It's freezing, and we need to talk. All of us." "The stage." "We'll leave without you." His voice brooked no argument. "Come inside. Mary, please." She looked at them, Thomas steady and determined. Sarah tear-stained but hopeful. Her family, if she was brave enough to claim them. Mary picked up her bag and followed them in. "Mrs. Henderson was in the kitchen, wrapped in a shawl, coffee already brewing despite the early hour. She took one look at Mary's traveling dress and snorted. "Running? We thought you had more backbone than that." "Mrs. Henderson." "Don't Mrs. Henderson, me. Sit down. All of you. Sarah, stop sniffling and fetch the milk. Thomas, get the cups. Mary, that bag goes in the corner and you go in that chair. Now. They obeyed. Even Thomas, responding to the authority in her voice. Soon they were gathered around the table. Sarah in Mary's lap despite being too big for it, clutching her like she might disappear. Now then, Mrs. Henderson said, tell me what that Harding woman said. Mary repeated the conversation, voice flat. When she finished, Mrs. Henderson laughed, actually laughed. Is that all, Lord preserve us from fools and gossips? She fixed Mary with sharp eyes. Did your husband have gambling debts? No, we lived modest, but we never wanted. James was careful with money. Did dangerous men kill him over debts? No, he died trying to make peace in someone else's quarrel. The doctor who tended him will swear to it. So will the minister who gave last rites. Then what are you running from? Mary looked down at Sarah's head. The appearance of scandal, the shadow of doubt. Even if I could prove the truth, some would choose to believe the lie. That's how gossip works. That's how cowardice works. Mrs. Henderson corrected. You think Thomas hasn't faced down worse? You think this family hasn't weathered storms before? This is different. How? Thomas spoke for the first time since they'd sat down. How is this different from any other battle we've fought? Because it's my battle, my past. You shouldn't have to. Shouldn't have to what? Stand by the woman I love, defend the mother of my child. At Mary's intake of breath, he pressed on. That's what you are. Whether we've said vows or not. Sarah's mother in every way that matters. My partner in everything but name. Did you think I'd let Abigail Harding's poison change that? People will talk. Let them. I've got lawyers in Austin who can track down the truth about James if needed. I've got business partners who trust my judgment over small-town gossip. Most importantly, I've got you, unless— His voice went uncertain. Unless you don't want us, unless this is an excuse to leave because you've reconsidered. No, the word tore from Mary's throat. Never that. I wanted to protect you. We don't need protecting, Sarah said, voice muffled against Mary's chest. We need you. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. Seems to me the question isn't what Abigail Harding says, it's what we do about it. And I vote we face it head on. Thomas, you'll write those lawyers today. Get affidavits about James Whitfield's character and death. Mary, you'll hold your head high and go about your business. And I'll have some pointed words with certain gossiping magpies. It won't be that simple, Mary said. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Mrs. Henderson's voice gentled. Child, do you think Thomas's first marriage was without scandal? Elizabeth's family cut her off for marrying beneath her. Said Thomas would never amount to anything, just a rancher's son with big dreams. They spread stories too, trying to force her home. Mary looked at Thomas, who nodded grimly. I never knew. Because they faced it down together. Mrs. Henderson continued. Made a life despite the talk. Would have been happy too, if they'd been better suited. But that's neither here nor there. Point is, every family faces trials. Question is whether you face them together or let them tear you apart. But Sarah's tougher than you think. Aren't you, girl? Sarah sat up, wiping her nose on her sleeve in a way that would have horrified her mother. I already put dirt in Susie Harding's milk pail. And if anyone says mean things about Mary, I'll put dirt in their milk too. We'll work on your revenge strategies, Thomas said dryly. Maybe something less likely to get you expelled from school. The mockingbird doesn't run when the crow calls, Sarah said suddenly. It sings louder. Mary taught me that. Mary's eyes filled. Her own words, twisted into a life lesson she'd never intended. Oh, little bird. So we sing louder, Sarah continued, warming to her theme. We be so happy and so good that their mean words sound stupid. We show everyone that our family is the best family, even if it's different. From the mouths of babes, Mrs. Henderson murmured. Thomas reached across the table, taking Mary's hand. She's right. We don't run. We don't hide. We live our lives and let the truth speak for itself. But Mary, it has to be your choice. Stay and fight with us. Or go if you truly think it's best. But choose for the right reasons. Choose from love, not fear. Mary looked at their joined hands, his sun-dark and scarred. Hers rough from work, not the hands of gentry, either of them. Just two people who'd chosen to build something from loss. The stage has probably left by now, she said. There'll be another tomorrow, and the day after. Thomas's thumb traced circles on her palm. Question is, will you be on it? Mary thought of the life waiting in Austin or California or wherever she ran to next. Safe, perhaps. Quiet. Alone. Then she looked at Sarah's fierce, tear-stained face, at Thomas's steady eyes, at Mrs. Henderson's knowing smile. I suppose, she said slowly, I should unpack. Sarah's whoop of joy could probably be heard in town. She threw her arms around Mary's neck, nearly strangling her with enthusiasm. Thomas's smile was like sun breaking through storm clouds. Even Mrs. Henderson wiped at her eyes, though she'd deny it if asked. Good, the older woman said briskly. Now that's settled. How about some breakfast? Drama's all well and good, but it don't fill bellies. They moved into the familiar rhythm of morning, but everything felt different, precious. Mary cracked eggs with hands that shook slightly, still overwhelmed by the choice to stay. Thomas kept touching her hand on shoulder, fingers brushing as she passed him plates like he needed reassurance she was really there. Sarah chattered nonstop, planning their defense against gossips with the strategic mind of a tiny general. We'll be so perfect they'll have nothing to say. I'll get the best marks in school. Mary will make the best pies for the church social. Papa will donate more to the church building fund. We'll be unapproachable. Irreproachable, Thomas corrected, hiding a smile. That too. Later, after breakfast was done and Sarah had reluctantly gone to dress for school, Mary found herself alone with Thomas on the porch. Her carpet bag sat by her feet, looking foolish in the morning light. I'm sorry, she said, for being ready to run, for not trusting. You've been alone a long time, Thomas interrupted gently. Fighting your own battles? Takes time to learn you don't have to anymore. What if the lawyers can't find proof about James? What if the rumors get worse? Then we'll deal with it. Together. He pulled her close, and she let herself lean into his strength. Mary, I need you to understand something. You're not some burden we're taking on. You're not a charity case or a convenience. You're the woman who brought music back to this house, who made Sarah believe in love again, who made me remember how to hope. We need you as much as you need us. More, maybe. I love you, Mary said, the words coming easier now. Both of you. So much it terrifies me. Good. Terror means it matters. Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. Now, let's get that bag unpacked before Sarah sees it and panics again. As Mary carried her few possessions back to her room, she thought about roots, how they grew deep when you stayed in one place. Even when storms tried to tear you loose, how they tangled with other roots until you couldn't tell where one ended and another began. She was done running. Whatever came gossip or trouble, joy or sorrow, she'd face it here. With this man and this child and this cantankerous old woman who'd become her family. Let Abigail Harding and all the rest talk themselves hoarse. Mary had found something worth fighting for, worth staying for. That evening, as she tucked Sarah into bed, the child asked, You promise you won't try to leave again ever? Mary smoothed the quilts, thinking of all the promises broken in a hard world, but some promises you kept, no matter what. I promise, she said. Wild horses, remember? And mean ladies with ugly rumors. Those, too, especially those. Sarah smiled, settling into sleep with the confidence of a child who'd fought for her family and won. Mary stayed until her breathing deepened, then made her way to the kitchen where Thomas waited with coffee and plans for the letters to Austin. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside was warm and safe and theirs. Tomorrow would bring challenges, trips to lawyers, confrontations with gossips, the slow work of proving truth over lies. But tonight, they were together. And that, Mary thought as she sat beside the man she loved planning their defense, was worth more than all the clean reputations in Texas. Spring came early that year, painting the Texas hills with blue bonnets and Indian paintbrush. Mary stood in the garden she'd expanded, hands deep in good soil. When Thomas found her, he'd been to town, meeting with the lawyers who'd sent proof of James's honorable death. The documents had arrived 2 weeks ago, but today he'd done something else with them. Posted them at the Mercantile, he said, satisfaction in his voice. Right on the public board, next to the church announcements. Let anyone who wants to read the truth. Mary straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. Thomas, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. He pulled something from his pocket, a small box that made her heart stutter. Just like I have to do this. Thomas. 6 months are up. Mary, 6 months and 3 days, if you're counting, which I have been. He dropped to one knee right there in the garden, among the new lettuce and spring onions. I did this wrong with Elizabeth. Big fancy proposal at a society ball. More about showing off than showing love. Won't make that mistake again. Mary's hands flew to her mouth, dirt and all. Oh, Mary Whitfield, you've made this house a home. You've given my daughter, a mother, and me a reason to smile again. You've faced down storms and gossips and your own fears, all with more grace than anyone has a right to. I don't have much to offer, just a ranch that needs tending, a daughter who adores you, and a heart that's yours complete. Will you marry me? He opened the box. Inside wasn't a diamond or fancy stone, but a ring of braided gold and silver. 2 metals wound together inseparable. Had it made special, he said, suddenly uncertain at her silence. The jeweler said it wasn't fashionable, but it seemed right. 2 lives twisted together, stronger for the joining. It's perfect, Mary whispered, then louder. Yes, oh, Thomas, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then stood and kissed her there in the garden, neither caring about propriety or who might see. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, they heard clapping. Sarah stood on the porch with Mrs. Henderson, bouncing with excitement. Finally, I thought he'd never ask. Mrs. Henderson. You owe me a penny. I told you it would be this week. Sarah Jane Mallory. Were you wagering on my proposal? Thomas tried to sound stern, but was smiling too wide to manage it. Just a friendly bet. Mrs. Henderson said, entirely unrepentant. Girl's got good instincts. Now come inside, both of you. This calls for the good coffee. And Sarah, run tell Reverend Murphy he'll be needed Sunday next. Sunday, Mary blinked. But that's only 5 days. 6 months was quite enough waiting, Thomas said firmly. Unless you want something fancy, we could wait, plan something proper. No. Mary looked at her ring, perfect in its simplicity. Sunday's perfect, just family and close friends. Nothing fancy needed. Sarah whooped and ran for town, bare feet flying, Mrs. Henderson shook her head but was smiling as she went inside. Thomas and Mary stood in the garden, hands clasped, both a little stunned by how fast things were moving. You sure? Thomas asked. No regrets about a simple wedding. Elizabeth had 300 guests and a dress from Paris. I'm not Elizabeth. Mary squeezed his hands. I want to speak vows in the church where we've worshipped together. I want Sarah there with flowers in her hair. I want Mrs. Henderson fussing over the food. I want real, not fancy. Real it is, then. He kissed her again, soft and sweet. Mrs. Thomas Mallory. Has a nice sound. The next 5 days passed in a blur. News of the wedding spread through town like wildfire. Reactions mixed as expected. Some, like the Murphys and widow Patterson, offered genuine congratulations. Others kept their distance, whispering behind hands about the unseemly haste. Mary ignored them all, focused on the joy of preparation. Sarah appointed herself chief wedding assistant, picking wildflowers for bouquets and practicing walking slowly for her role as flower girl. Mrs. Henderson baked enough food for 50, though they expected far fewer. Thomas handled the legal matters, making sure Mary and Sarah were protected no matter what. The night before the wedding, Mary sat brushing Sarah's hair, both of them in nightgowns. "Tomorrow you'll really be my mama?" Sarah asked. "I'll be your stepmother officially. But Sarah, you know I've loved you as my own for years now." "I know." Sarah turned, looking serious. "Mary, can I tell you a secret?" "Always, little bird." "Sometimes I forget what my first mama looked like. I try to remember, but her face gets fuzzy. Does that make me bad?" Mary's heart ached. She pulled Sarah close. "No, sweetheart. Memories like that sometimes. It doesn't mean you loved her less." Papa showed me a photograph, but it didn't help. She looked like a stranger. Sarah picked at the quilt. "But I remember you. Every day. Even the first ones. Is that wrong?" "Nothing about love is wrong," Mary said carefully. "You were so young when she passed. It's natural that the mama who raised you feels more real than the one who couldn't stay. Will you tell me about her? When I'm older, the good things. I'll tell you everything your papa remembers. All the good things, and we'll make sure you know how much she loved you, even if she had to leave." Sarah nodded, satisfied. "I'm glad you're staying." "Hey, me too, little bird, me too." Sunday dawned clear and perfect, the kind of spring day that made Texas feel like paradise. Mary wore her best dress, blue calico. Nothing fancy, but Thomas had said it matched her eyes. Sarah had wildflowers braided in her hair and a basket of rose petals to scatter. Mrs. Henderson wore her good black silk and complained about her joints while secretly wiping tears. The church was barely half full, but everyone there genuinely wanted to celebrate with them. Reverend Murphy beamed as they entered, his wife playing the small organ with enthusiasm, if not perfect skill. Thomas waited at the altar, handsome in his Sunday suit, looking at Mary like she was everything good in the world. She walked toward him on trembling legs, Sarah preceding her with great solemnity, scattering petals with the concentration of one diffusing dynamite. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Murphy began, and Mary barely heard the words. All she could see was Thomas's face, the love there so plain it took her breath. When it came time for vows, his voice was strong and sure. "I, Thomas, take you, Mary, to be my wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and health, in good times and bad, in joy and sorrow. I promise to love you, cherish you, and stand by you all the days of my life." Mary's voice shook, but carried, "I, Mary, take you, Thomas, to be my husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and health, in good times and bad, in joy and sorrow. I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you all the days of my life." The ring. Sarah produced it proudly, only dropping it once. Thomas slipped it onto Mary's finger, where it joined the engagement band. 2 circles of promise. "By the power vested in me by God in the state of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief, mindful of the audience, but full of promise. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Mallory, Sarah abandoned all dignity and launched herself at them both. "We're a real family now," she announced to everyone. "Official and everything." Laughter rippled through the church, even from some who'd come more from curiosity than goodwill. It was hard to resist Sarah's joy, or the obvious happiness of the couple before them. The reception in the churchyard was simple misses. Henderson's good food, wildflower centerpieces, children running between the tables. Mary noticed Abigail Harding standing at the edge, face pinched with displeasure, but even she couldn't dampen the day. As afternoon wore on, Thomas pulled Mary aside, away from the cheerful chaos. "No regrets?" he asked, touching the rings on her finger. "None. You—" "Only that it took so long to get here." He gestured at the celebration, Sarah teaching other children her made-up wedding dance. Mrs. Henderson arguing happily with Widow Patterson about biscuit recipes, Reverend Murphy sneaking a third piece of cake. This is what I wanted, family and community, and you at the center of it all. "It's perfect," Mary agreed, then laughed. "Even with Susie Harding putting grass in the lemonade when she thought no one was looking." "Sarah's corrupting influence spreads," Thomas said dryly. Then, more serious, "Thank you, Mary." "For what? For staying? For fighting? For teaching all of us that love's worth the trouble it brings?" Mary leaned into him, her husband now-in-law, as he'd been in heart for months. "We taught each other." As the sun began to sink, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the newlyweds made their farewells. Sarah would stay with Mrs. Henderson for 2 nights, a honeymoon of sorts, though they'd go no farther than the old cabin by the creek Thomas had fixed up special. "Be good," Mary told Sarah, kissing her forehead. "Be happy," Sarah countered, wise beyond her years. They rode out in the buggy, cans tied to the back rattling cheerfully. Mary waved until the church was out of sight, then let herself lean against Thomas's shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "About mockingbirds," Mary said. "How they take other songs and make them their own. How they sing loudest at dawn and dusk, the in-between times. And we're like that, aren't we, taking the broken pieces of other songs, yours and mine and Sarah's, and making something new, something ours." Thomas transferred the reins to one hand so he could wrap his arm around her. "I like that, the Mockingbird family." "Has a ring to it," Mary agreed. They rode on through the spring evening, toward their temporary honeymoon refuge and their permanent home. Behind them, the church bells rang the hour, calling the faithful to evening prayer. Ahead, the first mockingbird of evening began its complex song, borrowed melodies made beautiful by fearless repetition. Mary closed her eyes and listened, feeling Thomas's heartbeat under her cheek, the ring warm on her finger, the future spreading before them like the wild Texas hills. There would be challenges, still there always were, but they'd face them together. This family built from loss and love and the daily choice to stay. "Listen," Thomas said softly. "He's singing your song." And sure enough, mixed in with the mockingbird's repertoire, Mary could hear it, the lullaby she'd sung to Sarah that first night and every night since. Their song now, carried on the evening air. A promise that some things, once chosen, could never be lost. "Mrs." Thomas Mallory smiled and sang along, adding her voice to the mockingbird's chorus as they rode home through the gathering dusk. In the distance, a child laughed, a church bell faded, and all the world seemed to pause, listening to a woman's song of love found, kept, and cherished against all odds. As night fell gentle over Texas, 3 hearts beat as one man, woman, and child, bound not by blood alone, but by choice, by tenderness, by the 1,000 small acts that make a family. And if the mockingbirds sang extra sweet that night, well, perhaps they recognized a kindred spirit in the woman who'd learned to make a new song from the pieces of the old. The end. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you listening from? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share what touched your heart in this story of family, resilience, and the courage to choose love over fear.